Usually I don't bring the whole family with me, but they're all there in the back. But we had to leave most of the robots at home today, unfortunately. Or they're abroad doing their thing. I'll start with a short introduction about myself. I've a background in physics and mathematics. When I was a kid, I was always fascinated by that. And this is one of my big teachers, I think, Richard Feynman, because he managed, unlike many other physics professors, to combine this really creative side of himself with this very abstract, technical or academic side of physics. And this is a quote that I stumbled upon a while ago that I really like for many reasons, for many projects that I work on. Science is like sex. Sometimes something useful comes out, but that's not the reason why we are doing it. And you can take from that what you want, but from my side, that means we start on projects often that don't have any reason at all, but funny things come from that. So a few years ago, we had a pumpkin in our garden. We planted about 40 plants, and we had one pumpkin, so we decided to make a robot out of it. You could make pumpkins in other ways, but usually in our family, it involves a robot in some form. So I posted this 2 days before Halloween, and Make magazine picked it up, and they posted it on their site, and I had 1,000 hits in a few hours. And since then, I became a contributor to the Make magazine website, and I've been writing articles for them just by posting this silly thing we made in a few hours, just before, just at the right time and in the right location. So, as for my professional career, a big part of it has been about making physical interactive installations. I've been doing that for more than 16 or 17 years now. It all started a long time ago, making my first graphical interfaces on these frigates of the Belgian army back then in Zeebrugge. And that showed people that I wasn't just making multimedia in the virtual sense, but also in a physical space. This is an example of an installation we made for Proximity BBDO. I worked there for more than 7 years here in Brussels. And this was one of the most spectacular installations probably I made there for Dodge. Many of you have seen this probably, where we had a Dodge Viper on a bungee cord, and you could get in and then fall to your death, and you were filmed. And then the day after, it was all online. The day after, because it was 2007, before YouTube, it's already passed right now, before Snapchat, before any smartphones. That's why it was kind of a technical challenge to get these videos online so fast. So the other side of my career was is about character design. And when I was starting at BBDO, I was making a lot of games, flash games. They were very popular back then, and I had a lot of liberty in these creations. I could make the story and the concept, but also developing it and designing all the characters. And that's how I got this interest in character design. I started making them also just for fun and for my kids. And I got in touch with the people of Pictoplasma. Pictoplasma, if you don't know, the organization of the conference, it's held every year in Berlin, and it goes really deep into character design, what it means, what the theory behind it is, and not just looking at funny pictures and cool animations. And so there, at a certain moment, 3 years ago now, I came back from Berlin, and I got a call actually the day after from Boondoggle, the agency Boondoggle. They asked me, "Can you build us a robot?" And at that moment, those two worlds, the physical interaction design and the character design, really came together, collided there, and I knew this was what I've been leading, my career had been leading up to until then. So I had never built a robot before in my life. They needed him 5 weeks after that call, but I knew I couldn't let this slip away. It has to be, I had to do this. They told me they looked everywhere in Belgium for somebody who could make a robot, and they couldn't find anybody, so they called me. That's already set the tone a little bit of what they expected from me. But anyway, it was the start of a really fun 5 weeks. The only part I really designed from scratch was his face, because that's obviously a really important part in the communication with his audience. And all the other parts came from stores where I could find them. I spent hours and hours in the Innovation here, at the bottom section. Innovation is the robot store here in Belgium, where you can buy all kinds of robot parts. Also other stuff, but this is obviously a robot torso that you can see there, and I bought that one and about 15 minutes later it was in pieces. And I've been buying a lot of these blenders now on eBay and second-hand stores. We also have a bunch of these glass jars, by the way, in our cupboard. If you need one of them, you have some spares. So Yummy was going to be the host on a website for Deleuze. Kids could collect cards with ingredients from all over the world, and they could present it to Yummy, and he would give them a recipe from somewhere over the world. So he had to appeal to kids, of course, act on stage, because that was his main task, being on stage, so we could film him for a few days, and maybe then later go on tour in the Deleuze stores. And he had to be a kitchen robot, of course. So I spent a lot of time designing the eyes and finding the right balance between the pupil and the white of the eyes. I was, at a certain week, I was standing in the Veritas every day, buying new black buttons. People at the counter were thinking maybe you should try a zipper, because buttons are obviously not working for you. So this is him coming together. It was far more complicated than I imagined. And this is also everywhere in our living room back then, which was fun for the family. Every flat surface in the house became the robot studio. And this is the day before the final shoot, when he was assembled for the very first time, and he looked at me for the very first time, and then there was this really intense emotional moment for me, for him probably too, and we became friends at that moment. It was really a strange experience for me. Of course, I had been working day and night for 5 weeks, so I was already in an emotional, questionable state. So, but it wasn't just with me. I noticed this with other people too. I'm teaching him to drive, by the way. We're gonna beat Google, I'm sure of that. Technically, it's not gonna be a self-driving car. It's gonna be a robot driving a car. But I noticed this with other people too. They wanted to make a connection with them and talk to him, take selfies with them, and kissing him. Yeah, he likes that. So it wasn't just my personal experience. It was something about the way he looked and the way he interacted with people that made them want to connect with him. So anyway, at that moment, I decided I want to be a robot maker. That's my job right now. So forget all the rest. This is going to be my new career, much to the delight of my wife there, by the way. You can ask her about that part later on too. But I had to be critical for myself for a moment there and look at what these robots actually are. Are they really robots, or are they puppets? Are they something just interactive installations that happen to have a face? So if you think about robots, they These are the terms you think about, of course. They're perfect, they have a purpose in life, they're flawless. And Yummy had, of course, none of these qualities. And every time I scratched him somewhere during the process or there was some defect, I was really nervous about it, but the client loved it because that made him more real. And that was, of course, very liberating for me. I could just scratch and dent it everywhere I wanted. It was all adding to the effect of having an actual real robot living machine there. They could have just hired a CG artist to make this robot, and probably it would have been a lot easier for them. But they wanted to see this machine being made by a guy in his living room, and not just get it out of a box from China or have somebody rendered it on their computer. Yummy had other qualities that were really important to them, and that was this imperfection, this empathy he had, this beauty, maybe even a soul. So, more robots came from that. Herb was the next one in line, because I really liked the idea of a furry robot. He's kind of badass. He doesn't do a lot, except from being a badass and looking at people and making bad friends. That's what he does. If he sees bad people, they're his pals. He really looks up to him. You see that? The next project was Bradley, and this was an interesting observation I had there. It's a really simple machine with the Kinect controller here. You can see him, the controller there. But if you stand in front of him, he would mimic the posture you do in front of the installation. If you wave your arm, he would wave back in his head and his legs. But this is really simple, light balsa wood and some very simple servos. If you would move really fast, his arm would fall off or his leg. So you could have looked at it as a very bad machine. It had some defects. But instead, people who interacted with it would start moving more slowly because they felt sorry for him. They said, maybe if I don't move that fast, his arm won't break. And that's just because there's some holes there that represent his eyes, and maybe people want to feel an emotional link with it. When I was searching for ways that people could communicate with the robots, I was also looking at different interpretations of body language. This is the pine cap I made. It's not a robot in itself, but you can wear it, and the spikes on top, they go up and down depending on the mood of the person who's wearing it. And it was also a fun project because I got to electrocute Bart de Pauw on national television with it, which was fun. And now at this stage it's using a skin conductivity sensor, so a lie detector sensor. And depending on the stress level you have, the spikes go up and down. I also made a more female version of the same installation, the magnolia, with the artificial magnolia flower on a head that opens and closes, depending on the mood of the person wearing it. So my wife wears that, I wear the pine cap, and when we walk on the street, we can have fights without saying a word, and it's really fun and spares a lot of effort, of course. So here's a close-up. Yeah. These aren't really perfect pieces of fashion, I know that, but it's more meant to have this out there as fast as we could. It's just built in a few weeks, and you can see the motors inside there. It's not really that clean, but it's to inspire fashion designers or other people who are making this kind of stuff, and to have discussions with them about this. So back to the robots. If people talk to me about robots, of course the fear of the robots comes up pretty often, and that's of course because of all the scary machines we can see in movies and stuff. Anything that is much more powerful than humans and much more intelligent is something that scares us, and that's a really interesting story for a Hollywood movie, but unfortunately many people are taking these ideas also in reality, in the real world, and that's where I started thinking maybe it's time to get a counterbalance there and start thinking about robots that aren't just built for military purposes or for academic research, but also just for as a creative medium, because that could yeah, give a counterweight to the progress we are seeing in this direction. Now, I have nothing against these Boston Dynamic machines. They're amazing, of course, but they shouldn't be the only robots there out there that are getting attention right now, because that's what really scares people. If you look at the humanoid robots that are being developed right now in Asia, like for instance, there is a lot of white plastic, of course, and yeah, a 70s television as a head. There is no expression there, no face, no eyes. And that's, of course, what people also need to get a connection with this humanoid figure. So why would it need a face, of course? Is it just for communication or getting information about what the character, the robot, is trying to tell you? This is the graph of the hypothesis of the uncanny valley. It says that if you make a character and it becomes more and more human, people will like it more and more, especially when it moves. But then, right before you make the perfect copy of a human being, there's a valley. People don't like it anymore. It looks scary. It's a little bit too real. It's zombie-like. And there are millions and millions of euros and dollars being spent to cross this uncanny valley, to make this perfect human copy. While there is another side to another bank in this valley, where you can make robots that don't look human at all, but have exactly the same technical capabilities, the same ways of communicating and perceiving the world and reacting to it, but they're just not human. This is Professor Hiroshi Ishiguro. I got the huge honor of talking to him very briefly a few years ago at Ars Electronica in Linz, and he makes the Geminoids and the Telenoid here. He makes these copies of himself and other people. And I told him about Yummy and Herb, and I guess it didn't really get it, or he didn't want to get it. Maybe it was the cultural gap. Maybe it's my questionable social skills. I don't know. It's just, we didn't get started in the conversation. He had an important meeting with a bar somewhere. So he ran off, but he told me right before he went, he was going to look for the robot soul. That's actually where I got the title of my talk from. Because then at that moment I realized that's what I have been noticing with the robots, with Yummy, with Herb. Maybe they have this soul, a way of connecting with people that's not just by their mechanics and electronics, but that has something more to do with their story and the way they're present in our life. Of course, afterwards I learned that the soul he meant in Japan has a little bit a different meaning as what we perceive here in the Western world. People in Japan are more used to embracing physical objects in their life, in their circle of empathy, like we also do with pets or small animals that live in our house, in our family. That's the next stage they've reached there in embracing just physical objects that aren't biological life. And they call it a soul too, but I think there's more to that than just embracing these physical objects. If we look at people who have done extraordinary things in history, like these people who walked on the moon, they have, of course, a very technical task to do there, and they needed to bring these rocks from the moon back. But that's not really the most important motivation to go there. It's just to show that humans, people like us, with arms and legs and a head, could be there, could be in this really exotic environment and survive there and come back. And in a way, they were actually representing the whole of humanity, and all of us could feel, yes, this is a part of me standing there on the moon. It's for all of us that they are doing this. We have this connection with these astronauts on the moon. Now, if you look at Curiosity here on Mars, it's an amazing accomplishment from NASA to get it down there, and they want to involve the larger public, of course. They call this picture the selfie. I guess they mean that's his head there, and they want to get, he has a Twitter account, never answers me, by the way. But can you imagine what it would do to public opinion if there would be a head like Yummy's face on there? I know NASA would never go that way, but there are other people out there making robots that will explore space and other exotic environments for us. And if you want to have an emotional involvement from people, I'm certain that is going to be a way to go. People don't have a lot of problems to see these emotional link in very abstract characters. If you look at Wall-E here, he doesn't look human at all, and still the first 15 minutes everybody is just feeling along with his story there. So this is my son Lucas, the one on the left, obviously. And if I look at how they interact with the robots in our house, they're already, of course, very involved in all the robots in our house, so they're not really objective about it. But for them, the robots aren't just characters that live in a book or in a movie or just another creative medium. They actually have a life like ours. They know, obviously, that they're not biological life forms, but they also live in the same time scale. If they go on a trip and they come back and there's some defects, some scratches, it shows that they have a life that progresses in the same scale as our life does. And that is what I started exploring more in the robots afterwards. So this is Bill, this is Ted. This is Robin. He's in Moscow right now. He was the latest addition to the family, and he's a kind of a DJ. Yeah, listens to ultrasonic music. We can't hear it as humans, but I hear it's good. So, what people told me when they told me, I realized yes, that's what's happening. What people told me is that you can. They learned a lot of what it means to interact between people when they interacted with the robots that had some form of disability or some form of, they needed help from us in some way. Like Rachel and Robin, they don't have legs or wheels. We have to carry them around everywhere. And if you look at the example of Bradley or Yummy, who breaks down a lot, that shows us that we can take care of these machines and even feel sorry for them or have feelings for them to help them along in their life. That could be an example for many other interactions we have with actual human beings that could could help the world along in a positive way and not just ignoring many people around us. And that is, there's a lot of theories about that, and I won't get into that too much. But the fact that this robot, this character, is so non-threatening to many of us, we can see this very obviously in research people do with children with autism, where they can interact, these kids interact much faster with a robot that is looking not human, but more friendly and non-threatening, and then evolve more and more to interacting with actual people again. So I've decided already at a very early stage of my robot career, if I want to tell people that they need more robots in their life, I should start teaching, of course. Here I'm teaching now at Erasmus High School here in Brussels, in our Fab Lab. And of course, all the students there are making robots in some way, or the character design part is always really important. And this is Awesome. We made him with a bunch of 4- and 5-year-olds. They have no idea of the mechanics or the electronics inside, but we just gave them some templates of different body parts. and said, yeah, just design the way you like it. After an hour and a half, they could interact with the robot, with the Kinect controller again. So making this alive, this character, they assembled with the whole group without having to worry about all the technical stuff behind it. So these are some of the examples of my students. So it's a moving, autonomously driving robot platform, but as you can see, the character is really important there. A few months ago, I went to Qatar, to Doha, where I taught a class for a few days to fashion students and interior designers. So they had obviously no knowledge of mechanics and electronics, but in 3 days, we started from these very simple parts I brought with me, and then they made the characters out of them, and some of them are still there in Qatar, and even went to Art Dubai, I heard. So that was a new medium they really assimilated really quickly there. A few weeks ago, I went to Moscow, where a large robot festival started then. It still goes on until the end of August. And Rachel and Robin are there right now. And they, yeah, I was almost blown away by the enthusiasm of the Russian people when they saw these characters, because there are many other robots there, but they're more doing very functional things, many KUKA robots and autonomously driving platforms, but none of them at a really appealing face, apparently. So this is Steve. This is one of the biggest characters I've made until now. He's working for Brightfish right now, for the Kinepolis group, and he's entertaining people in the movie theaters, or he will be, and he can also entertain people on stage. That's why he becomes so large, and he can go down if we drive around on the street. The people of Brightfish, they noticed that people can also watch movies just at home, though they need something that makes going to the movie theater interesting, more interesting again. And I had this idea of Steve based on Steve McQueen in my drawer somewhere. I already had the base of the robot laying around, and last summer they told me, yeah, we want to make this robot. Do you have an idea? Yes, it's Steve. He's practically finished. So 5 months later, he was actually finished. And now he will be deployed in movie theaters in the following months. So I want to finish with Rachel, still one of our favorites, because Rachel is based on the character Rachel from the movie Blade Runner. And if you haven't seen the movie, by the way, it's the best movie ever made, so you have to go and watch it tonight. I won't spoil the story then for you, but as an art director, that's an amazing source of inspiration for me. You could just pause this movie at any frame and hang a picture of it on your wall. It looks amazing. But anyway, Rachel in the movie, she has a problem. She needs other people to make her feel real. I won't spoil the story now for you, but that's kind of the same problem our Rachel is having. Rachel was made, commissioned for Pictoplasma for an exhibition last year in Berlin, and then she went to Mexico for 8 months. She came back for just 2 weeks, and now she's in Moscow, and she's just traveling the world, and the only way we have to get to know if she's still okay is people posting Instagrams and tweets of her, and we can see her moving now. She has a problem in Moscow, but we have 5 engineers working on it, I heard. So that's really an interesting observation for me as her creator, of course, because other people are looking at her and talking to her almost every day, now in Moscow and then in Monterrey, in Mexico, and that makes her real. That makes her a real-life character for these people, and of course, even though I don't observe it directly, makes her real for me too. And that is an amazing observation, of course. That's what's happening with many of the robots, really in very small steps. In in our family at least, and wherever they are. That is, the more we interact with them and the more my kids and other people talk to them, the more they become actual living characters. So that's where we come to the quote I talked to and Carmen already introduced me with, by Anais Nin. We don't see these things as we are, we see them as they are, we see them as we are. That not only applies to robots, obviously, but it's really striking how much this connects with the robot team. So that's where I want to end. If you want to check more of the robots moving, and I have a lot of videos of them online, you can look at that on my website. And this is my Twitter handle and also on Instagram. You can see a lot more photos there. So thank you for your attention.